The political earthquake that just rocked Australia has Anthony Albanese's office in absolute panic mode, and what I'm about to reveal will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the future of our nation. While mainstream media tries to bury this story deeper than a wombat's burrow, Pauline Hanson just delivered the most devastating political truth bomb in Australian history, one that could completely destroy Labor's carefully constructed narrative and expose the terrifying reality of what's happening to the country we all love. This isn't just another political speech or campaign promise. This is a sitting senator looking Australians dead in the eye and declaring that our nation is heading toward a cliff at breakneck speed. The One Nation leaders' frank assessment at the 2025 National Bush Summit wasn't just brutally honest, it was a political nuclear weapon that's left the establishment scrambling for cover and ordinary Australians demanding answers that no politician wants to give. Here's what the Canberra elite don't want you to know. Hanson's latest statements aren't just criticism, they are a complete roadmap of how Australia's political class has systematically betrayed the very people who built this nation. When she declared "it's not the country I grew up in," she wasn't just making casual conversation, she was issuing a political death warrant for everyone who's been complicit in transforming Australia into something unrecognizable. But before we dive into the explosive details that have Labor strategists working overtime and Liberal power brokers questioning their entire existence, smash that subscribe button like your democratic future depends on it, because after what Hanson revealed, you're going to want front row seats to the political apocalypse that's about to unfold across Australia. Picture this scene: Toowoomba, Queensland, not the marble halls of Parliament House, but a place where real Australians gather to discuss real problems affecting real communities. The 2025 National Bush Summit brought together the kind of people who actually understand what's happening outside the Canberra bubble, and it was here that Pauline Hanson delivered her most devastating political assessment yet. Standing before an audience of farmers, small business owners, regional leaders, and ordinary Australians who've watched their communities transform beyond recognition, Hanson didn't just speak, she unleashed a verbal tsunami that's still sending shockwaves through the political establishment. Her declaration that she's frightened about Australia's future wasn't political theatre, it was a wake-up call that should terrify every Australian who cares about this country's destiny. Now here's where this story gets absolutely explosive, and this is the part that has Albanese's inner circle in complete meltdown mode. Hanson didn't just criticize current policies or make vague statements about government failures, she systematically dismantled the entire facade that Australia's political elite have been hiding behind for decades. Her claim that politicians have lost contact with grassroots Australians isn't just an opinion, it's a damning indictment of a political system that's completely abandoned the people it's supposed to serve. Think about what this really means for a moment. We're talking about a woman who's been in Australian politics longer than most current MPs have been adults, someone who's witnessed firsthand the systematic transformation of our nation's political priorities, and she's telling us that the people running this country have no idea what ordinary Australians are experiencing. This isn't political hyperbole, this is an insider exposing the complete disconnect between those who govern and those who are governed. But the real bombshell came when Hanson outlined exactly what she means by grassroots Australia, and her description should send chills down the spine of every politician who spent the last decade pandering to inner-city elites while ignoring the communities that actually keep this nation running. She's talking about farmers in drought-stricken regions who can't get basic support while billions flow to urban pet projects. She's talking about small business owners who are being regulated out of existence while multinational corporations get tax breaks. She's talking about families in regional towns who watch their communities die while politicians obsess over international climate commitments. This is where Albanese's worst nightmare becomes reality, because Hanson isn't just criticizing government policy, she's exposing the fundamental lie that modern Australian politics is built upon. While Labor pretends to represent working Australians, they are actually serving an entirely different constituency, one that shares absolutely nothing in common with the people who built this nation through blood, sweat, and determination. The phrase "it's not the country I grew up in" might sound like nostalgic rambling to inner-city progressives sipping their oat milk lattes, but to the millions of Australians watching their communities, values, and way of life systematically dismantled by political elites, these words represent something much more powerful. They represent recognition, validation, and most importantly, political representation for people who've been ignored for far too long. Let's be absolutely clear about what Hanson is really saying here, because mainstream media is desperately trying to dismiss her assessment as the complaints of someone stuck in the past. She's not talking about wanting to return to some imaginary golden age, she's talking about the systematic destruction of the social contract that once existed between Australian governments and Australian people. She's talking about politicians who campaign on representing ordinary Australians and then spend their time in office serving interests that have nothing to do with Australian welfare. The timing of Hanson's assessment couldn't be more devastating for the current government, because it comes at exactly the moment when ordinary Australians are feeling the full weight of policies that prioritise everything except their immediate needs and concerns. Cost of living pressures that make basic groceries a luxury purchase. Housing prices that have turned home ownership into an impossible dream for entire generations. Energy costs that force families to choose between heating and eating. These aren't abstract policy failures, they are life-destroying consequences of political decisions made by people who'll never experience their impact. What makes Hanson's critique so politically lethal is how she's connected these immediate hardships to the broader theme of political disconnection. She's not just saying that times are tough, she's explaining exactly why they are tough and who's responsible for making them tougher. According to her assessment, we have a political class that's so insulated from real Australian life that they literally cannot comprehend the consequences of their decisions on the people they are supposed to represent. But here's the part that should absolutely terrify Labour strategists and anyone else invested in maintaining the current political status quo. Hanson's assessment isn't just resonating with her traditional support base, it's connecting with Australians across demographic and political lines who recognise the truth in what she's saying, even if they disagree with some of her other positions. When a politician starts making sense to people who normally wouldn't give them the time of day, that's not just political success, that's the beginning of a political revolution. The National Bush Summit setting for this bombshell wasn't accidental, it was strategic genius that demonstrates exactly the kind of political intelligence that establishment politicians consistently underestimate. By delivering her assessment away from the Canberra media circus, Hanson ensured that her message would be heard by the people who matter most, the Australians actually living with the consequences of political decisions made in their name but without their input. Regional Australia has become ground zero for the political disconnection that Hanson describes, and her choice to address these issues at a gathering of regional leaders sends a clear message about who she believes represents the real Australia versus the artificial Australia created by political spin and media manipulation. These are communities that have watched industries disappear, services decline, and opportunities vanish while politicians talk endlessly about prosperity and progress that never seems to reach beyond major metropolitan areas. What's absolutely brilliant about Hanson's political positioning is how she's managed to frame her criticism in terms that make her opponents look completely out of touch with reality. How do you argue against someone who's saying politicians should be more connected to ordinary Australians? How do you defend a system that prioritizes international opinion over domestic welfare? How do you justify policies that make life harder for the people who are supposed to benefit from government representation? The answer is that you can't, which is exactly why this assessment has the potential to be politically devastating for everyone who's been part of the problem that Hanson is describing. She's not just criticizing specific policies or particular politicians, she's indicting an entire approach to governance that puts everything except Australian interests first. Her declaration of being frightened about Australia's future carries particular weight because it comes from someone who spent decades watching political trends develop and understanding their long-term implications. This isn't fear-mongering from someone trying to gain political advantage, this is genuine concern from someone who's seen enough political cycles to recognize when fundamental problems are being ignored in favor of short-term political convenience. The grassroots disconnection that Hanson identifies goes far beyond simple communication problems or occasional policy disagreements. She's talking about a complete breakdown in the relationship between government and governed, where politicians operate in a parallel universe that has no meaningful connection to the reality experienced by the people they claim to represent. This breakdown manifests in countless ways that ordinary Australians experience daily but that rarely penetrate the consciousness of political elites. Regulations that make perfect sense in theory but destroy livelihoods in practice. Social policies that sound progressive in inner-city focus groups but create chaos in regional communities. Economic strategies that boost statistical measures while making individual lives measurably worse. What makes Hanson's assessment so dangerous for the political establishment is how it connects these individual frustrations into a broader narrative about systemic failure. She's not just complaining about specific problems, she's explaining how those problems are symptoms of a much larger disease affecting Australian democracy itself. The country that Hanson grew up in wasn't perfect, but it was one where political leaders understood that their primary obligation was to the Australian people rather than to international organisations, multinational corporations, or ideological movements that view Australia as nothing more than a testing ground for social experiments. The transformation she describes isn't just about policy changes, it's about a fundamental shift in political priorities that has left ordinary Australians as afterthoughts in their own democracy. This is why her assessment represents such an existential threat to politicians who've built their careers on maintaining the current system while pretending to represent change. Hanson isn't just offering alternative policies, she's offering an alternative understanding of what Australian politics should be about and who it should serve. The fear that she expresses about Australia's future isn't based on paranoia or political opportunism, it's based on a clear-eyed assessment of current trends and their logical conclusions. If political disconnection continues to worsen, if ordinary Australians continue to be ignored in favour of special interests, if the social contract between government and people continues to deteriorate, then the Australia that emerges from this process will indeed be unrecognisable to anyone who remembers what this country was supposed to represent. Her frank assessment serves as both warning and call to action for Australians who still believe that democracy should serve the people rather than the people serving the convenience of democratic institutions. This isn't just political criticism, it's a roadmap for understanding how we got to this point and what needs to change if we want to avoid the future that currently frightens even experienced politicians like Hanson. The political earthquake triggered by these statements is just beginning, and the aftershocks will continue reverberating through Australian politics for months to come. Because when someone with Hanson's experience and political longevity says the current trajectory is unsustainable, smart politicians start paying attention, and smart voters start demanding answers that go beyond the usual political platitudes and empty promises of change that changes nothing. If you thought tonight's story was wild, trust me, what happens next will blow your mind. So don't stop now. Click on the video right here on your screen to continue the chaos, the drama, and the inside scoop only we deliver. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and join the Australian News CC family where the real stories come to life. See you in the next one.